Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
I'm trying to think when handshakes really became a norm within my life. When you're in high school, you're meeting somebody new. You really don't do the handshake thing. Maybe I don't recall doing that. I was captain of my football team in high school and college, and before the game, you have the coin toss and you go shake hands with the officials and the other team. That certainly was a part of it. But even in college, it's just, I think you acknowledge people. Maybe we shook hands. Well, I guess we did. Now that I think about it, in college, it was certainly a part of fraternity life. But nevertheless, once you get out into the professional world, then handshakes become more of the norm. You're shaking hands with colleagues, clients, vendors, whatever, it becomes part of the norm. And the reason I say that is because once you start engaging in lots of handshakes, you start to notice that there are differences. I mean, in college, I hung out with mainly football players, manly men, if you will, all kind of manly man handshakes. But when you start getting out into the professional world and you kind of run the whole gamut between the bone crusher handshake, all the way down to the limp fish handshake or the fingertip grab handshake. And people, do handshakes really matter? Do they matter? Does having a good handshake matter? And that's a question that people will ponder. And it's easy to say, well, yes, they do. But I have stumbled across some research that was in the Journal of Applied Psychology, and they certainly showed that handshakes matter. What they did was they brought interview candidates into, I think it was a mock interview process is what it was, and they brought them in, had them fill out forms. There was kind of an intake sort of a procedure, and as part of that intake procedure, they come in and the person who's greeting them shakes their hand. They're given forms and somebody else shakes their hands. They're taken to a waiting area, somebody shakes their hand. And all the people who are shaking hands, then once they've shaken the hand, they don't do it immediately, so nobody knows it's the mock interview or interviewee, I should say. The person going in for the interview doesn't know that, okay, somebody's rating my handshake, but these people who have shaken hands will then rate the handshake and determine, what they thought about the particular candidate. And then the candidate is brought into a particular, into the interview. And the interviewer doesn't shake their hand. The interviewer just interviews them and then makes a determination on the hireability of the candidate. How well did they interview? Is this somebody that how would they do in a real situation is what they're determining based on the interview. And let me back up. The people who are the different stages of the different stages of intake, when they make an indication of the handshake, what they're determining or what they're opining on, if you will, is the hireability of the particular person. And there was a strong correlation between those who shook the person's hand and were not part of the interview, saying, hey, this person's hireable, and the interviewer saying, okay, I had a great interview, this person's a high likelihood this person will get hired. Strong correlation between those two things. It's a correlation, not a causation. Causation would mean a strong handshake will get you the job, and that's not what I'm saying at all. That's not what the study is saying at all, is that there is a strong correlation between somebody who has a good handshake and how they carry themselves otherwise. Um, I'm sure there's a lot to pick at there. There are people I know out there that are very, very competent who don't have great handshakes, and people out there that are have great handshakes and are not competent at all. So it's a high correlation. It's not a perfect correlation, if you will. Um, and in that study, they controlled for looks and attire and things like that. But the firm handshake correlated with traits associated with trust. Um, and there's other studies out there that a handshake will signal cooperation or within a negotiation setting as well. So there's lots of evidence out there to show that a handshake, there's a high correlation between having a good handshake and being successful in other areas. A good handshake will certainly signal um, I'm present, I'm respectful, ready to engage, and it's certainly a clue. It's certainly something you notice. I always say, don't, you're better off to not be known for your handshake than to be known for having a bad handshake. You go through and you'll run into 80% of the people, 90% of the people will have a decent handshake. And there's that 10% that are either really, really firm, you just broke my hand, down to you didn't really shake my hand at all. You just grabbed my fingertips. Or it was very light natured. What they found in the study was that, and I'll get myself in trouble here, but women tended to have um, a less, um, they're more on the lighter end of it, but it still mattered with respect to their handshake. In other words, I guess it was almost like we're grading on a curve here, right? We expect men to have these really firm handshakes, and men on the lower end having a weaker handshake might be as strong as a woman's handshake, um, but you would, but the women are they're being judged on a different scale, I guess is the best way to put it. Right or wrong, but that's what the study reported. You want to avoid the limp grip. You want to avoid the bone crusher. But what makes a good handshake, according to the study, in dissecting all of this, um, web to web, web to web contact, meaning their thumb web and your thumb web meet up. So it's a good deep handshake. Sometimes I'll shake somebody's hand and it's kind of off, and it's like, come on, let's do that again. Let's get a good web-to-web handshake. Two pumps, right? It's kind of weirded out where it's like this. Okay, 10. Not going to let go of my hand. You're going to keep pumping my hand. Two pumps is optimal. Eye contact, natural smiles. Square stance, facing up to them. Avoid the limp. The limp grip, the bone crusher, looking away. Clammy hands was a kind of a no-no, although it's um, sometimes you can't help for that. I guess you can wipe your hands off. It always seems a little weird. Somebody's wiping their hands off before they shake your hand. So the point is, a handshake matters, right? And think about it. Think about having a good handshake. I try to notice handshakes. I certainly notice when I get a good, strong handshake from a woman. They stand out. I mean, not bone crushers, but hey, I'm here, I'm present. This is a good handshake. There's a more, and I understand women don't want to get their hands broken. You never know when and that's how it's been explained to me. Is like, yeah, I grab the fingertips because I don't know what somebody's going to do to my hand. I'm like, okay, fair. But I notice when women have a strong handshake. With respect to men, it's more, again, as I said earlier, I'm more recognizing when somebody doesn't have a good handshake as opposed to when I don't notice when somebody just has a normal handshake. So focus on your handshake. You can always practice with friends, or not practice per se. Hey, let's practice handshakes. But you go to business meetings, you go to networking events, you have opportunities to, okay, I'm here, I'm going to shake some hands, I'm going to get better at it. You can certainly, think about it. Just thinking about what you're doing when you're doing a handshake. I've had bad handshakes. Like I said, sometimes it's off, sometimes I'm, don't have a firm enough grip. I'm sure there have been times where my hands have been clammy. It's just something that you need to focus on because in the end, handshakes matter. It's not the only thing that matters, but it's one of the pieces to the puzzle that will give you that first good impression. Maybe not just even a good first impression, but an ongoing impression. You're going to shake somebody's hand for the first time once, but you might be shaking their hand time and again on an ongoing basis, and can always be improving, and it can always be heading in the other direction as well.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.